Everybody seems to be talking about
mitochondrial function.
And just keeping the mitochondrial function upregulated. And just keeping the mitochondrial function upregulated. And just keeping the mitochondrial
which is weird because mitochondria are something you learn about in like middle school. What do they have to do with bodybuilding? Why do people keep talking about SLU-PP-332 and its connection to mitochondria? What is this? Well, let's talk about it. This video is going to be divided into 5 parts. I'm going to define mitochondria. I'm going to talk about how mitochondria impact metabolism. I'm going to discuss mitochondrial dysfunction and obesity. I'm going to analyze different ways to improve mitochondrial health. And if you stick around to the end, I'm going to talk about how PEDs impact mitochondrial health. And I'm going to discuss the proposed interaction between SLU-PP-332 in mitochondria and DNP. Let's get into it. This video is for educational entertainment purposes only. Mitochondria are specialized structures that exist inside nearly every cell of the body, except for red blood cells. They're often called the powerhouse of the cell because their primary function is to produce energy in the form of ATP, which is used by the body to carry out numerous functions. Here's something cool. Mitochondria are actually semi-autonomous. This means they have their own machinery for replication and energy production. Although they're a part of your body now, they contain remnants of their bacterial origins, making them somewhat distinct from other structures within the body. Historically, mitochondria are believed to have originated from an ancient symbiotic relationship with bacteria, but today they're fully integrated into your cell's physiology, and without them, your cells wouldn't be able to produce the energy needed for vital processes like muscle contractions, brain activity, and even digestion. Now, how do mitochondria produce ATP? This process is called cellular respiration, and it happens in 2 main stages, glycolysis and oxidative phosphorylation. Glycolysis happens outside the mitochondria, breaking down glucose into smaller molecules, but most of the ATP production occurs inside the mitochondria through oxidative phosphorylation. But that's not all. Mitochondria have other essential roles. They help regulate cell metabolism, controlling how fats, sugars, and proteins are used. They manage calcium ions within cells, which is critical for healthy cell function and signaling. They're involved in cell signaling, playing a role in processes like growth, inflammation, and cell death, and they help maintain cellular health by removing damaged proteins and other waste products. But when mitochondrial health declines, cells struggle to produce energy, which can cause a whole host of metabolic issues, including weight gain. So keeping them healthy is key. To that point, let's talk about how mitochondria interact with your metabolism. Mitochondria play a huge role in fat metabolism and energy production. They're responsible for breaking down fat and converting them into energy, which is necessary for maintaining a healthy metabolism. Here's how it works. When you break down fat, it gets transported to the mitochondria, where it undergoes beta oxidation and is converted into acetyl-CoA. This then enters the Krebs cycle, which produces ATP. In addition to breaking down fats, mitochondria are essential for burning them efficiently. When they're working well, your body uses fat as its primary energy source, which is much more efficient than burning carbohydrates. But when mitochondrial function is impaired due to aging, stress, poor diet, and perhaps PEDs, your body will struggle to burn those fats and it may store more of them. In fact, mitochondria directly impact fat storage in the body. As I said, when mitochondria aren't functioning properly, the body has trouble converting fat into energy. This will lead to fat accumulation, particularly in the abdominal region. Additionally, this is also tied to insulin resistance. When mitochondria aren't functioning properly, the body becomes less responsive to insulin, which can lead to more fat being stored. But of course, not all fat is the same. Brown fat is a special type of fat that actually burns calories to produce heat. It contains more mitochondria than white fat, which is the type of fat that stores energy. So, the more mitochondria in your cells, the better your body can burn fat rather than store it. And one of the key drivers of mitochondrial dysfunction is obesity. In people who are obese, there's often a decrease in mitochondrial density and function, particularly within muscle cells. As I stated previously, this means the body is more likely to store fat rather than burn it. This can lead to a terrible positive feedback loop, where the impaired mitochondrial function leads to greater fat accumulation, which further worsens mitochondrial function, leading to greater oxidative stress, more fat storage, and in turn, worse mitochondrial function. So if you're trying to restore and improve mitochondrial health, we have to break this cycle. And one of the best ways to do so is through caloric restriction, through dieting. Studies show that caloric restriction can increase mitochondrial biogenesis by activating genes like PGC1A, which help produce new mitochondria. Caloric restriction can also enhance mitochondrial efficiency, making them better at producing ATP and less likely to waste heat as energy. Additionally, caloric restriction reduces oxidative stress, preventing damage to mitochondrial DNA and improving long-term mitochondrial health. Though caloric restriction is useful for mitochondrial biogenesis and health, it's important to note that starvation has the opposite effect. If you diet too hard, too quickly, too aggressively, you will likely impair mitochondrial function. Generally speaking, it seems like going above a 40% deficit, which is a massive deficit, will have direct negative ramifications on mitochondrial health. A mild to moderate deficit, something like 10 to 20% of your overall caloric intake, will ensure that your mitochondrial health and efficiency improve, not worsen. Let's widen the lens a bit and talk about the different ways we can improve mitochondrial health and function. I've already spoken extensively about the importance of diet and caloric restriction and how it can improve mitochondrial efficiency. But simply maintaining a healthy diet can pay huge dividends too. Having a low inflammatory, low oxidative stress inducing diet can really help your mitochondrial health. This means avoiding things like processed foods, minimizing saturated fat intake, and essentially focusing on a whole food diet. Additionally, one of the biggest levers we have when it comes to improving mitochondrial health is exercise. Exercise, especially aerobic exercise like running, swimming, and jogging, rely heavily on mitochondria for energy production. During exercise, mitochondria generate ATP to fuel your muscles, and the more mitochondria your muscles have, the better they are at burning fat for energy. So, by engaging in regular exercise, particularly cardiovascular exercise, you will increase mitochondrial density. You will increase your body's need for mitochondria, and as a result, you will generate more mitochondria. Resistance training is still good for mitochondrial health, but cardiovascular training, particularly long-duration cardiovascular training, is best for mitochondrial health. I mentioned before how oxidative stress can have a negative impact on mitochondrial health. If you're seeking to reduce your overall allostatic load, one of the best things you can do is simply improve sleep and reduce stress. This will make you feel better in a very tangible, real way, but will also help to directly improve mitochondrial health and function. Additionally, there are some supplements that have shown promise in improving mitochondrial health, such as CoQ10, L-carnitine, and nicotinamide riboside. Now let's talk about the various ways in which performance-enhancing drugs can negatively impact mitochondrial health and function. This is drug-dependent. For example, anabolic steroids have different impacts on mitochondrial health in comparison to things like growth hormone. But broadly speaking, PEDs have the capacity to cause oxidative stress, impair mitochondrial biogenesis, and negatively impact cell metabolism in a number of ways. Anabolic steroids specifically can cause oxidative stress, which may damage mitochondria and impair their function. Over time, this can lead to mitochondrial dysfunction, reducing energy production and promoting fat storage. Long-term usage of anabolic steroids may negatively impact mitochondrial biogenesis, leading to decreased energy production and potentially fatigue. Growth hormone and IGF-1 stimulate muscle growth, but they can also lead to increased levels of oxidative stress. Additionally, excessive GH and IGF-1 can lead to mitochondrial apoptosis, or programmed cell death. This in turn reduces mitochondrial health in tissues like muscle and fat. Stimulants like ephedrine and clenbuterol increase overall oxidative stress and raise cortisol. These substances can also cause muscle overwork, which can lead to greater mitochondrial inefficiency and cell stress. Lastly, it's worth noting that selective estrogen receptor modulators and aromatase inhibitors, substances that bodybuilders typically use to control their estrogen levels, can have a negative impact on mitochondrial health, particularly because low estrogen can directly impair mitochondrial biogenesis and efficiency. Alright, now let's talk about the new kid on the block, SLU-PP-332. SLU purportedly works by activating estrogen-related receptors, which are key players in regulating mitochondrial function and metabolism. SLU activates estrogen receptor alpha, beta, and Y with the most potent effects on alpha. This activation leads to the regulation of genes involved in mitochondrial biogenesis and oxidative metabolism. Animal studies show that SLU enhances mitochondrial respiration and energy production, improving fat metabolism and muscular endurance without the need for physical exercise. Essentially, SLU acts as an exercise mimetic, making the body think that it has exercised and producing similar results. However, I personally still remain unconvinced of its efficacy. The most important thing to note here about SLU is that, as I mentioned before, caloric restriction, dieting, improves mitochondrial biogenesis and efficiency. And so it's not likely that SLU would be particularly useful during a diet because mitochondrial biogenesis and efficiency is already improving during a diet. I really want to emphasize here how powerful caloric restriction is on mitochondrial health. When you diet, particularly when you diet in a healthy, sustained way, you are likely simultaneously improving your mitochondrial health. It's the biggest and best lever we have. And so while it's possible SLU could be building and compounding upon this effect, it's not likely, and its effects are likely marginal at best. From a theoretical perspective, it might be the case that SLU is most useful for people who simply aren't healthy enough to exercise. However, anecdotally, it appears that SLU isn't powerful enough to actually help those individuals. Clearly, more research and testing is needed. Lastly, let's talk about DNP. DNP, thankfully, isn't used as much as it once was because it is incredibly dangerous and toxic. DNP is a powerful, incredibly effective weight loss drug. But the problem is that the efficacious dose of DNP is incredibly close to the lethal dose. And so if one seeks to take DNP, they're essentially playing Russian roulette, particularly because you're probably buying this compound illegally and thus you don't know how it's dosed. And it can be very, very easy to overdose and potentially die. However, why am I talking about DNP here? Well, DNP has a direct impact on mitochondrial function. DNP works by uncoupling oxidative phosphorylation, meaning that mitochondria produce less ATP and generate excess heat instead. This increased heat production can raise body temperature dangerously, leading to hyperthermia. DNP also increases reactive oxygen species, which can damage mitochondrial DNA and proteins, impairing mitochondrial function and leading to long-term mitochondrial dysfunction. I wanted to close on DNP because I think it illustrates the broader issue here. Mitochondrial health is deeply responsive to the stressors you place upon your body. And the interesting thing about stressors is that there tends to be a relationship between the amount of stress placed upon the body and the degree of adaptation. A greater stressor tends to lead to a greater adaptation and greater potential harm. And we see this when looking at things like PEDs. So, for example, the substances, the performance-enhancing drugs that potentially have the greatest impact on your body, something like DNP, which can get you shredded in a relatively short amount of time, these stressors also cause the most damage and have the most direct negative impacts on mitochondrial health. The implication here is clear. There's no such thing as a free ride. The more you want out of your body, the more you push yourself, particularly from a chemical perspective, the more likely you are to reap negative repercussions in terms of your mitochondrial health and your overall health. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this video useful, please don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Appreciate you.